Hello, what we're going to be doing in this video is we're going to finish off lesson 2.10. So what we did before we ended the class last night is we added 5 different labels and we set a bunch of constraints on the labels. So each one of the labels is 20 pixels away from each other, and then they are lined up horizontally. So the last exercise was a bit repetitive. Managing the constraints of multiple objects can be tedious, especially when the position of each element is the same distance from the previous one. What if you decide later to have 30 pixels of separation between labels instead of 20? Or what if you want all of the labels to be positioned on the left side of the parent instead of in the center? You would have to spend a lot of time updating each and every constraint. So Interface Builder provides a smart approach. Rather than creating and updating lots of individual constraints, you can use the stack view to automatically manage the constraints of its child views. So a single stack view manages either a row or column of interface elements and arranges those elements based on the properties set on the stack view. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to select the 5 labels. Another way that you can quickly select the labels is just left click in and then go ahead and select all the labels, draw a box around them, and what we've done is we've actually selected all 5 labels. So the next thing I need to do is I need to go ahead and embed them in a stack. So in order to do that, I'm going to click on the Embed In button down in the lower right hand screen and click on that, and what we're going to embed those labels in is within a stack view. So I'll just click on stack view, and basically what comes up is if you go ahead and look, now all of my labels are within my stack view, and all the constraints that were set for the labels have now been removed. So what we're going to do next is we're going to add some constraints to our stack. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure my stack is selected, and what we're going to do is the first thing, I will go ahead and add some new constraints. So what I want to specify is the top edge, the leading edge, and the trailing edge all should be sent to 0. And then the last constraint I'm going to specify is the height, and the height of my stack will be 300. So I will go ahead and add those 4 constraints. So the next thing I'm going to do is to make the labels look a little easier to identify. I'm going to go ahead and change the color of each one of my labels. So the first label, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in and actually change the color. So let me go down to my background, and what I want to do is I want to go into custom, and I am going to go into my list of colors, and I am going to set this one to salmon. So I'll select salmon. I'll go ahead, click on my I like to hike. What I want to do is I want to set this to flora. Then loves to read. I'll go ahead and set this to silver. Has 4 cats. I will go ahead and set this to lavender. And then finally has 3 grown children. I'll go ahead and set this to carnation. Okay, so I've kind of specified the various colors for the labels so you can see the borders of those labels. The next thing I noticed is that I have an error in my constraints, so I will just go ahead and click on that and then click on the solution, And yes, I want to go ahead and change the priority, so I will go ahead and remove the error within my constraints. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and pause the video for just a couple of seconds while I open up the textbook, and what we're going to be looking at is page 254 of the textbook. So let me go ahead and pause the video first. What we have on page 254 are some StackView attributes. We have the alignment, the distribution, and the spacing. So we've already gone in and updated the colors. So the first one we're going to look at is if we go back into our and go in and select our stack view, what we have here is the axis. So that's the first one, and the axis can either be a vertical or horizontal. So you can either have a vertical stack view or a horizontal stack view. Since our labels were lined up vertically, it eventually created that vertical stack view for us by default. The next attribute is the alignment, and it describes how the elements within the stack are positioned. There's fill, leading, center, trailing. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back in and mess around with those for a second. So the default is fill. So if you look at fill, our alignment is center. Sorry about that. I will go ahead and click on fill, and basically what it does is it fills the label to the full extent of our stack view size. If we go ahead and click leading, basically it sets them to the leading edge, and if we go ahead and select trailing, it basically sets all our labels to the trailing edge. So I will go back in and select center, and then what we're going to do is we're going to look at the distribution next. So the distribution defines how the elements are distributed within the stack view. So we can have a fill. The stack view will resize the arranged subviews so that they fill all of the available space along the axis you specified. And as we can see, the stack view will size the first label as large as possible to completely fill the stack. So that's what it's done in this first view. We will go ahead and change to fill equally. Now basically what we have is each one of our labels is filled equally, and we have that 20 pixel spacing between them. We'll go ahead and fill proportionately. So if we go back into the book, fill proportionately, the stack view resizes the arranged subviews that they fill all of the available space along the axis. If the size of the stack view changes, the views are resized proportionately to one another. So the next one, we're going to go ahead and do equal spacing. So basically what that does is it specifies them an equal distance apart, and then finally equal centering. So that didn't really change anything because they are currently centered. So I'm going to change it back to fill, and then the last thing we're going to look at is the spacing. And basically the spacing describes the amount of space between each element in our stack view. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and change the spacing to 0 and hit enter, and now you can see it definitely expanded the first label, so it's expanded all the way down. The rest of them have 0 spacing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and change the fill. We're going to change it to fill equally. So if I change it to fill equally, then they're right next to each other and filled equally, proportionately. Doesn't change anything, and then spacing with equal spacing between, that doesn't affect the size of the actual spacing. I will go back to fill equally, and now if I go ahead and change the spacing, what it'll do is it'll keep on adding spacing within there. The other thing that I can do is I can go ahead and actually remove the height constraint. So if you go ahead and click on the ruler, and if you want to remove a constraint, this is probably the easiest place where you can see all the constraints on each one of your controls. So I'll just select the first one and click on delete. And now what it's done is it's shrunk down my stack view. And then if I go back in and change my spacing to 0, what it does is it shrinks my stack view down, and it includes those labels where they fill the stack view equally with no spacing. So that's all I wanted to cover in this video, so we will talk to you next time.